Hello, my name is Russell Preston Brown from Adobe Systems, and this is The Russell Brown Show. In this episode of my series of tutorials about mobile photography, I'm going to be talking about working with Adobe Photoshop Mix in combination with Adobe Lightroom Mobile. Now here I am at Point Reyes, California, at high tide here at this shipwreck. Or am I? Is it really high tide? Or if I adjust these layers here inside of Adobe Photoshop Mix, do I realize that in fact it was low tide and there's just mud here in front of this shipwreck? So in this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate a way in which you can export your images from Adobe Lightroom Mobile into Adobe Photoshop Mix and then add a special effect like a reflection. Let's get started. I'm going to go right over to Adobe Lightroom. This is where I start most of my projects. And this is the image that I'm going to work with. Of course, the original looks like this. And if you follow along with one of my earlier tutorials, you can see how I convert this image into this image here in Adobe Lightroom Mobile. I'm using several of the basic adjustments, and of course I'm using some dehaze to give it this overall dynamic look. So be sure and follow along with that tutorial to find out how I created this effect. Now, here inside of Adobe Lightroom Mobile, I'm going to export my image directly into Adobe Photoshop Mix, because sometimes there are special effects I'd like to add to an image to really add that next level. Because this is a little bit boring with this image of the mud in front of the ship, but if there were a high tide and you had a reflection, it would look so much better. So here from the upper right hand corner, here inside of Adobe Lightroom Mobile, tapping here, I can then go to this selection called Open In, right here. This way I can look through the selection of applications that I currently have running here and go over here to Adobe Photoshop Mix, right here. This will then copy this image directly into Photoshop Mix. And by the way, if this image originated on your iPhone or Android phone and you loaded it and imported it into an existing collection from your iPhone, you can now be working with the full resolution of your mobile image. This is a great new feature. Now, let's get started with this project. I'd like to keep this complex as well as simple. Let's go right over here to our menu to the right where you see our layers. The first thing I'm going to do is tap here on this base layer and duplicate it. I find that I can do some amazing things simply by duplicating an existing layer and changing blend modes, for example. But in this case, we're going to flip the image. Tapping one more time on that same layer we just created, I can now flip it in the Y direction, just like that. Now, down here at the base, I'm going to select Blend, right there. In the Blend mode settings, I can adjust the opacity over here to the right by tapping, holding, and in this case, dragging to the left. I want to get this somewhere near about 40%. I found that 40% works pretty well for a reflection, giving you just enough of the image that it doesn't look like a mirror, but instead a true reflection. Also notice that I've left this in the normal blend mode, right over here to the left. I did not see a need for adjusting the blend mode for this project. I'm going to accept these changes with the check mark over here on the right, just like that. Now, I can tap on the screen and move my reflection down, just like this. I want to move it to a point where I get a mirroring effect right about there. That looks pretty good. And of course, I can readjust its position. Now we want to do a cutout. We want to cut out or mask the portion of the image that reflects in the water. To do that, you can see that I have my layer currently targeted, and I tap down here to cut out, just like that. you can see a slightly softer and transparent version of the image because we set the opacity of this layer earlier to 42%. Up here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see this icon right here. If you tap on it, you can see the combination of both images with a first tap, and then turn off the combination of both images with a second tap. In this case, I want to turn them both on so I can use the base layer as a reference point for painting in my reflection. As you can see down here at the base, I'm in the basic mode for selecting the area that I want to mask or cut out. If you tap on this, you can also see you can be in the Smart selection. The Smart selection will do edge detection and help you make a selection, for example, around the edge of the ship. But in this case, I want to create an irregular shape that doesn't snap to edges, so I'm going to stay in the basic mode. Tapping away from that. Notice I can also adjust my brush size by tapping and holding. I'm going to use the standard brush right there, about a 25. Next, I'm going to start to select a region that I would like to add. As you see over here to the left, you can add or subtract. With my finger, I start to paint across the screen like this, and then I'll stop. Notice I can start to see the reflection down here in the lower portion, but I haven't gone far enough. I'm going to continue to paint with my finger. And now that I'm getting close to the edge here, I'm going to switch over to the Apple Pencil because I'm working here on the Apple Pro, and the pencil works really well with Adobe Photoshop Mix. Because now I can go in and do some really accurate addition to this area and this mask with the Apple Pencil. Notice as I'm painting it in here, I'm going to bring it right up to the edge of the existing reflection in the water, because I like to use a little bit of the existing reflection as part of my own reflection. It adds to the realism of the whole effect. I'm going to add a little bit more down here, right in this area. Just like that. And I'm making an irregular selection so it doesn't look too unreal. This looks pretty great just as it is. However, I want to darken the area in the foreground and have it gently blend into the image because it's a little bit too light right now and I can see too much of the mud underneath this reflection in the water. So this is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to select here to the right and accept these changes. So I now have a cutout of this area as my reflection. I'm going to go over here to my menu to the right and I'm going to tap on this reflection and I'm going to duplicate it. Watch what happens. Notice how the reflection got a little bit more clear. That was interesting. It's added to the density of the reflection, and remember its opacity was at 42. We're adding to the reflection with this process. But my reflection's a little bit too bright. So I'm going to tap on the lower of the two reflections that I created right here. And I'm going to adjust this one. I'm going to select Adjust over here. I'm going to select up here in the upper right-hand corner to view my entire image with all of my layers. And then I'm going to adjust the exposure of this lower layer. Notice how I can change the exposure and darken this lower layer. I'm taking the existing image and just making it darker underneath my other layer or my reflection. This is looking pretty good. And there you have it. A series of steps that you can try on some of your photographs to add a reflection. Give it a try.